Welcome to another Apollo Papyrus episode. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For this episode, my interview guest has over 6 decades of computer programming experience, hiked the entire length of the Appalachian Trail over 50 years ago, and is the author of the novels 17 Parcels and The Unlikely Redemption of the Thief Sydney Bridgewater, as well as the Manford of Morning Glory Mountain series of children's books. His name is Mic Lowther, and here's my interview with Mic. Mic Lowther, welcome to Apollo Papyrus.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to the show.
Feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Well, as you said, my name's Mic Lowther. I grew up in Minnesota. I went to school, got a degree in mathematics, and from there I went to New York, upstate, got a job as a computer programmer, and discovered it was the love of my life. I just loved programming computers. And as it turned out, I got my whole lifetime earnings from programming computers. And I wanted to write. That's one of the things I really wanted to do, but way back in college, I didn't have anything to say. I'd never been anywhere, never done anything, didn't know much of anything. And then I hiked the Appalachian Trail, and that gave me something not necessarily to say, but to write about. So I started writing a book about hiking the Appalachian Trail and discovered that I had the faintest idea how to write a book. So it took me 12 years to get it to the point where I said, this sounds pretty good. And so I ended up publishing it myself, and it's in the 3rd edition right now. So that worked out. And I've written a number of other books since.
2 of your novels are 17 Parcels and The Unlikely Redemption of the Thief Sydney Bridgewater. Without spoiling too much of either of those novels, what is each of them about?
17 Parcels is about a man in his later years who has accumulated a fortune of $1 billion, and he's faced with the task of figuring out what to do with it. All of this attention to earning money and investing has come at the cost of his relationship with his family. He wasn't there for his kids and always was busy and stuff like that. So he knows he should leave his money to his children, but he's not too impressed with what they've turned out to be. So he decides to make them work for it. So he packs up 17 parcels of information about himself, his investments, where his money is, and all of that, and hires a driver to bury these parcels all over the USA. And then he dies 10 years later. And at the reading of the will, his heirs discover that they're not just going to get $1 billion chopped up 3 ways. They've got to go do something. And they're not the least bit happy about it. But they kind of warm up to the subject and go on the search for it. And so they go find all of these parcels and over the course of a month or so. And in the attorney's office, they open them one by one, and then they learn the story of their father and his money and what he's set for them. And Sydney Bridgewater is a character in the law office that handles this account and this handling of the will. Um, when I wrote the book, I realized I didn't have a bad guy in there, so I got a bad girl instead. Sydney Bridgewater is a computer analyst in the law firm, and she has spent her entire computer working career stealing from her employers. And she sets her eye on this $1 billion, wants to see if she can get a chunk of it. And so she ultimately does not. And so she got her own book for her. The, wanting to break free of the path she's been on, come to, before she gets discovered, she wants to make amends and seek redemption. And that's the second book in the series about how she goes about doing that. So that's kind of a rough picture of what's going on in these two books.
You've referred to the two novels, 17 Parcels and the Unlikely Redemption of the Thief Sydney Bridgewater, as part of a trilogy on your website. What will the third book in that trilogy be called? And what, without spoiling too much of it, what will it be about?
Well, I'm writing it now, and it's entitled, great title here, because I don't know what it's going to be called yet. Uh, I have no idea where it's going, but where it's been has been a lot of fun. I've written about a third of it, and it takes this. It follows the subsequent adventures of the three children, because their mother has died, their father has died. So now they are uh, comfortably wealthy from the money left to them by their father, but they are trying to figure out what to do with the money and with their lives. And that's what this is about. And my style of writing is that I create these characters and I kind of just turn them loose to see what they do. And uh, when they get into conversations, I've been working with these characters for so long that I kind of know who they are and what they are and how they react to things. So I just turn them loose in a conversation and write down what they say. so, so that's what's happening in that book. And I'll be as surprised as anybody to find out where it goes.
In addition to your novels, you've written a couple of children's books in the Manford of Morning Glory Mountain series. Without
Yeah,
spoiling too much of each book in that series, what are they about?
that's what I did in the 90s. I wrote about Manford. And this is a cast of 7 characters, all animals that talk to each other. And I call this my $50,000 failed experiment, because I wrote all these stories and I really liked them, and my friends did too. This feature of these stories is that there's no violence. There's no dreaded monster that they're seeking or that's finding them. They're just characters that work together to solve problems. And um, that turned out to be not anything anybody wanted to read. I spent money getting it published and to get it illustrated. I got some beautiful illustrations all through the book by Jeff White, lives in Boston suburb, and but it just didn't sell. So I ended up with 100 cases of books in my garage, sitting on pallets. And what I did with them was that I mailed them all to children's hospitals in all 50 states. And so that concluded that. I still have a few on my shelf, but I freed up my garage. um, the characters are all lovable. They don't bicker and fight. They don't uh, diss each other. They all work with their individual skills to uh, solve problems. And that's been my way of living. Um, but I don't know. I did see a survey once of what people want in books, and violence is a big thing that they want. Well, I don't want to write about violence. I don't want to write about people with uh, recovering from something. I just want to write about healthy people who will go about their lives um, trying to make something of themselves. So that's my mission, and that's what those two children's books are about. They're just 36 adventures that they go on, and there's 36 more that aren't published because why would I spend another $50,000 on something nobody's going to read? So they're sitting on my computer, and someday I might publish them, and someday I may not. So that's the story of those. The only book that we haven't talked about is Taking the Long Way Home, which is a collection of my own hiking experiences over the course of 30 years. I kept a journal of most of them, and I gathered up the maps and I gathered up the journal pages, and I did all the research, and then picked out 16 different adventures that were interesting enough to write about. The place I went was interesting, or something interesting happened to me there, like almost drowning and stuff like that. And they include hiking a lot of interesting trails, one of which is the Chilkoot Trail, which is the one where the long line of gold miners coming up and over to strike it rich in the Yukon and the Klondike. Well, I hiked that trail. I didn't do it in the wintertime, and I didn't carry 2,000 pounds worth of gear. So I did that. I spent 24 days wandering alone in the Arizona desert as my walkabout that I did after I retired from work. And so there's a number of other adventures, and those were all collected, and I think they tell a pretty good story in itself. So that's been my history of writing. I wrote 2 adventure books, all my personal adventures, 2 children's books, and now 2 novels. And I had always wanted to write a novel, but I could never quite do it. But I got started on it, and many ideas would proceed, and I'd run out of gas about the 3rd chapter, saying, well, I've told the whole story. It's not going to go much for 3 chapters. So a lot of ideas are buried in the chapter 3 graveyard. But this idea with 17 parcels and the associated characters has lived on, and it's gotten 2 books so far, and I'm working on the third one. And I expect that I'll get that done sometime this year.
Why did it take you 45 years to write 6 books, and how has the book industry changed since you first started writing books?
Well, dramatically so. It took me that long because the first book took me 12 years to finish. And I didn't always write. I would go years without doing anything. But in the early days when I was writing, um, you submitted everything to traditional publishers. And I never had much luck with that. I've got, as I said somewhere, enough rejection letters on the finest stationery in Manhattan to paper the bathroom wall. And then self-publishing became an option. And so my children's books were published that way. And now there's self-publishing has progressed into publishing on demand, where you don't have to fill up your garage with books. You can get them one at a time, 100 at a time. And that's been a lot easier. And I don't deal with traditional publishers rejecting me.
You hiked the entire length of the Appalachian Trail during a 214-day period, as you described it, from snow to snow in the early to mid 1970s. What was it like to hike the Appalachian Trail over 50 years ago?
Well, I just came from a gathering of hikers and gave a speech on that subject. Well, I hiked it not alone, but I hiked it with my wife and 10-year-old daughter. And so the three of us were out there. There was no internet, there was no smartphone, there was nothing that tells you what to do. We just did research by reading books. And so when we got to the start of the trail, there was nothing there. There was no hikers getting ready to go. There was nothing to indicate that you were in the right place. There was just a sign that pointed into the woods, and it had a blue blaze on it. And so we followed it, and we followed it for 214 days back in 1973. And my daughter became the youngest person ever to through hike the trail, which means do it all in one season or one year. And that she was the youngest for a long time. Well, there were only 100 people on the trail that year. Now there's 2,000 people on the trail. And hiking the Appalachian Trail has become a thing to do for many people for all different reasons. We hiked it because my wife was a photographer and she wanted to be among things growing and green. And she wanted to, go on an adventure that involved the passage of seasons. And we accomplished that. It was snowing when we got there, and it was snowing when we left. And we went through spring and summer and fall and got a little bit of winter on both ends. And it was a life-changing adventure for all of us. Um, while she wanted to just take pictures and see the world, I wanted to make miles. I wanted to get there, and it took me a long time to get over the, the, the destination being more important than the journey. So, and my daughter, well, she was just a kid along with mom and dad until we got to the Smokies. And um, the typical hiker of the day were college age guys who were between semesters or between years of school, and they would go hiking. And they started to make a big fuss over Kira. Like, here she was, 10 years old. She's got 200 miles under her belt. This is really something. And all of a sudden, she changed from a kid who was just along with mom and dad to a through hiker. She was going to Maine. And so she became as motivated as the rest of us to, to hike every day. Hike, cook, cover miles, see what there was to see. And um, we had a great family experience doing that. And it wasn't easy, but nothing worthwhile is.
Are you all right?
I'm good.
Okay. You have over 6 decades of computer programming experience in 10 different computer languages. What computer languages have you coded in, and how have computer languages evolved since when you started coding?
Well, I started out with autocoder on the IBM 1401 in 1962 and progressed through COBOL and Fortran and PL1 and into more as the computers got more advanced, I learned assembly languages for each of them. And after after half a lifetime of coding that, I wanted to develop a system for the business that my brothers and I have. So I went to a computing service and I said, I know all these languages, but they're not even useful anymore. What's the current thing? And so I learned a new language, and it was like they took all the old languages and set them out on the garage floor and smashed them all into pieces, and then picked up the things that were useful and made a new language out of it. And it was the kind of thing where much of the background programming is already written for you. You have to uh, know where you're going, but it's way easier to get there once you learn it. So I'm really glad I did that. And that system has been working for our business for 20 years and hasn't needed any changes, I guess, because we thought it out to begin with. So, yeah, a lot of changes in the computer business. Um, I when I started in programming in 62, the concept of a systems analyst was just starting to be formed. Um, so a computer programmer was one thing, systems analyst who figures out they want an accounts payable system. So here's what programs you need to do that. And so the analyst puts all that together and develops a system that consists of programs. Well, there's not much use for systems analysts anymore because you can just go buy whatever software you need, pretty much. You can buy a package for accounts payable, you can buy a package for payroll. And so the lifetime of the systems analyst profession completely matched up with my career path. And so I got in it when it started and I left it when it was pretty much over. And so I really enjoyed my time as a programmer and as a systems analyst. And I still write programs, but they're the kind of thing where I have an Excel spreadsheet that I want to do some stuff with, and I write some background program that that does a lot of things that Excel doesn't do. So that's what I do with it now. But it's been a great lifetime, and I enjoyed it so much because the the computer has a set of rules, and they don't vary by who you are. You follow the rules, or your program doesn't work. And that's what I enjoyed about it. You could follow the rules, write the program, and if it worked, it was good. I didn't have to get involved in the politics of the business. I just got involved in how to make a system work and give people what they want. So it's been a very enjoyable lifetime of computering. And it's also been a enjoyable lifetime of writing, because I really enjoy the process of writing. And it's just me sitting behind my computer, making up the story and writing it and trying to get it to the point where it tells a good story and people want to read it and it makes them keep turning the pages. So it's the process. I really like the process.
Mr. Lowther, thank you for appearing on Apollo Papyrus. You were a wonderful guest.
Well, thank you.
Mick was an amazing guest, and I enjoyed interviewing him. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to write and read your passion. Bye for now. Remember to subscribe to the Apollo Papyrus YouTube channel at www.youtube.com/@ApolloPapyrus and the Apollo Papyrus Substack newsletter at apollopapyrus.substack.com. Y'all can visit the Apollo Papyrus website at campaaronapollo.wixsite.com/Apollo Papyrus and follow Apollo Papyrus on Threads, Instagram, Facebook, and Tumblr at Apollo Papyrus. Copyright 2024, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited, except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.